Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar about navigating school budgets. I'm Dr. Tracy Frederick, the Executive Director of the Kansas School Board Resource Center, and Ward Cassidy, our Senior Advisor, is also here with us today. If you're new to our webinars and you're not familiar with the Kansas School Board Resource Center, we want to let you know that our mission is to help school board members be effective advocates for students to focus on improving academic outcomes. If you have a question that you would like to ask of our presenter today, ask of Dave today, you can put that in the Q&A box that's at the bottom of your screen. If you can't see the Q&A box, if you click on the little circle that says more, you'll find it there. You can put your question in there and I will ask that at the appropriate time at the end of the presentation. And so also this presentation will be recorded. So you'll receive a link to the recording to review, and we encourage you to share that with anyone you think that would be helpful for. It will also be archived on our video resources section of the KSBRC webpage. So this afternoon, we are pleased to have with us Dave Trabert. Dave is probably familiar to you as he is to us, but to give you a little bit of background and reason why he's talking about this topic today, you should know that Dave is a former accountant. He speaks regionally and nationally on school budgets and finance. He is the Chief Executive Officer of the Kansas Policy Institute. He is the lead author of 3 books, 8 Things to Know About Running for School Board, Giving Kids a Fighting Chance with School Choice, and what was really the matter with the Kansas tax plan. He has other published works that include student-focused funding solutions for public education and removing barriers to better public education. Dave was an appointed member of the Kansas K-12 Student Achievement and Efficiency Commission. He serves on the Tax and Fiscal Policy Task Force, and he co-chairs the Education Finance Joint Working Group for the American Legislative Exchange Council. You can hear that Dave has been involved in education and particularly in finance and in taxes. So we know that you are going to benefit a great deal from what Dave has to talk about today about school budgets and finance. And I don't want to take up any more of your time, Dave. So I know you have a lot to share. So I'm going to turn it over to you and look forward to what you have to say.
Okay, well, thanks, Tracy. Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to be here. As Tracy said, I'm a recovering accountant, so it's been a while since I practiced, but I still remember how the debits and credits go, and that really comes in handy in studying school finance issues and tax issues and so forth. So I'm just going to jump right in here. Okay, so I want to start by talking about, are we really budgeting to achieve a goal, or are we just appropriating money? I can tell you with the state legislature, it's just about appropriating money. There's no goal. Ideally, you would want to have the purpose of your budget should be page 1 of the book. Something saying, for example, the budget is designed to improve reading and math proficiency level by 5 percentage points and to reduce the percentage of students with limited ability by another 5 points. That's why that describes why money is being spent the way it is in the budget. That's your purpose. If you don't have that, then you're really just appropriating money. You might not realize it because it's the way all school districts, all cities, counties, states, for the most part, they all do it that way. But this is a way of approaching the budget that is going to actually help you improve outcomes. You could start by giving some guidance. And again, this is something that most cities, counties, others don't do. But if you say, look, we want you to bring us a budget that doesn't increase property tax, and it may not cut a program or staff unless management says they're not directly related to improving outcomes. In other words, don't come back if you're a city. It's don't come back and say, well, we'd have to cut police and fire in order to accomplish that. No, we're not going to send out ransom notes. We want to know what are the things that we really can do. Uh, your purpose may be different. The guidance there could be with schools. It could be bring us a budget that achieves these goals and maybe doesn't increase property tax and doesn't close a school unless the staff is saying the school really needs to be closed. So you give the staff some guidance of what kind of a budget you want to see. Another thing to consider is whether your fiscal policies are aligned with your student outcome goals. And this is about making sure you're making the best use of money so that you can meet all of your classroom needs. So in purchasing, for example, you want to require the use of bulk purchasing. Now, that probably sounds like a no-brainer, and you might even think that you're doing it. But I'll tell you a story about a school board member a few years ago he said, "You're just not going to believe this." He said, "I'm sitting at the board meeting every month and we get our expenditure lists. And every month there's a list, an entry on here for the Walmart down the street. And we're spending more than $20,000 a month at Walmart." And I asked the superintendent, "Why is this?" And he said, "Well, sometimes the cafeterias run short of food or we run short of school supplies and so forth. And so we just run down there and get that." And he said, "But we have bulk purchasing deals, don't we, with Cisco Foods, with Staples and so forth?" And he said, "Well, yeah, but sometimes we just run short." And he said, "But so we're spending more money." And the superintendent's response was, "Well, but we're still under budget." And you might be under budget, but you're wasting money that could be put to much more productive use. So make sure you're doing it. You want to restrict your credit card use. Find out how many people have district credit cards and what kind of controls are in place. Uh, you might want to require board authorization of credit card charges, not just a bill that says we paid Visa this much money. What's the itemization? What are you buying? Because sometimes credit cards can be used to cover up a lot of purchasing. And make sure you're using purchase orders. So a, it's not just one person basically without a purchase order. You don't have a checks and balances against whether someone has authorized to spend this, whether it's in the budget. And of course, that's my old accountant coming out in me. Another one is on cash management. The In our experience, and this is based on looking at what school districts are actually doing, 15% of your operating reserves is sufficient. And by that, by operating, we mean total spending, not counting federal, not counting capers, capital outlay, or any kind of debt service. So you figure out what your operating expenses are in the coming year, and you'd want to have maybe up to 15% of that in the bank at the beginning of the year. You may have heard guidance from the state and other places that it should be much higher. It doesn't need to be, and we know this because every year dozens of school districts in Kansas operate with less than 12% of operating reserves. So we know it can be done. And the better use you make of cash, the more options you're going to have. You also want to have a zero ending balance in any of your restricted operating funds. We've checked this with the Department of Education. There is no requirement that you have money in a restricted fund. Debt service would be an exception, but I'm talking like at risk and special education. You need money to operate at the beginning of the year, but it does not need to be in any kind of a restricted operating fund. And I'll give you, maximize interest. Make sure that you're getting a good return on your money. You can do it. One easy way of doing it is buying treasury securities. Believe it or not, it's a government service called treasury.gov. It is really simple to buy 28-day securities. It turns over. You can do as frequently as you want, and right now it's getting about 3.5% interest. So here's an example of managing transfers to get down to zero balance. This is data for the Kansas City, Kansas School District. You can see that they finished the 2020 school year with $14 million in their special education fund. And then you see it went down each year getting to zero. The way they did that was to make sure they didn't put too much money in the other local transfers. There's some of the transfers are required, but then the others are optional. Now here's a different look at what Shawnee Mission has done. They ended up transferring too much money, so over that same period, they put about $23 million more into special education that was needed just to retain an $18 million balance. There's really $41 million in there that does not need to be there. And we've seen several districts, in addition to Kansas City, uh, finally understand that you don't have to have that balance in that fund because obviously it's restricted. So you transfer less each year to spend down that balance, and that frees up money for other purposes that year. Now, so some of the cash questions you could ask your superintendent would be, so who decides the amount of discretionary transfers that go from the general fund to special ed or other restricted funds? Now, I've heard um, that, well, KSDE says we're not required to. Now, you might hear Frank Harwood say, I've heard him tell legislators that districts should have 25 to 30% of their special ed spending in the special ed fund at the beginning of the year. That is absolutely not necessary. And that's according to other finance people at KSDE. And as I said, you can see many districts in Kansas have a zero balance. You need some money. So you want to ask questions about how do we get there also. Another one is just saying, look, we understand that dozens of districts operate with less than 15%. Shouldn't we try to do that? Start a conversation. Don't make a declaration. Don't come out because whether you mean it or not, it can come off as challenging. And you're really trying to get a consensus and look at ways that you can free up money. It's good to know where you invest cash and what interest rate you're getting. Sometimes local banks, and there's a tendency to want to work with local banks. But if you talk to them, if they're not giving you good interest, like right now, more than 3% on your money, you have other options. And maybe that's a negotiating point with your local bank. Now, in terms of building the actual budget, you want to build the classroom budgets first. And the easiest way to do this is to follow the building needs assessment law that says local school boards shall conduct these needs assessment meetings. And the goal is to have school board members hear directly from teachers and principals to understand what they need in their classroom. And because each year the reports, you've probably seen the reports, you have to answer two questions for each building. Number one is what are the proficiency barriers? What's holding kids back in this school? And then number two is what budgetary changes do we have to make to overcome that? Now, I've looked at probably hundreds of these reports, and I haven't found many that really get at what they're intended to do. But you want to make sure that you're getting, like, for example, we learned, or one district rather, learned that it had, when they started asking the question, uh, an elementary teacher put her hand up and said, I don't really feel like I know how to teach kids how to read. And as you can imagine, there was shock and awe among the superintendent and the principal and the board members. And then pretty soon, all but one other teacher said, yeah, me too. And they all gave the same reason for that. They said, we weren't taught how to do that in college. These are the kind of very basic things you can uncover that teachers aren't prepared to do their job. And it's not their fault. They weren't taught how to use the science of reading in that particular case. But you want to ask what these questions are and learn what the real barriers are. And then the hard work is finding out where you can move money around. And I've rarely seen it's when you say uh, what changes are necessary, we need more money is never the right answer because you have what you have. Your obligation is to try to find a way to make better use of the money you have. So you want your staff presenting a plan to reallocate resources in order to meet those building needs assessment results at the beginning of your process. This is what should drive your entire budget process. Um, and explain what. So let's say, for example, we decided we needed to add a reading specialist in our three elementary schools. And so in order to do that, we cut back on this. We didn't replace these positions and so forth. So you want you want to see it, you want the staff to see it, you want your community to see that you're identifying problems and you're taking corrective action to move money into the classroom to address those needs. So how do you find the money? Well, one good exercise we recommend is sitting down with your finance team and your superintendent and talk about dividing your spending into three buckets. Bucket number one is everything that is completely discretionary. You don't have to do it. You might have good reason for doing it, but you don't have to do it. There's no relationship to improving outcomes. Bucket two are the kinds of things that you have to do to some extent, and they have some impact on student outcomes. Obviously, if you don't have heat and power or roof over their heads, that's going to impact outcomes. You have to have some degree of administration, but it's not as much as you want to do. So you're looking at, again, the point is to look at, you're kind of prioritizing your spending. Bucket three, everything that's a direct impact on improving outcomes. Once you've done this, and then you have to start looking for money to reallocate, the easiest thing is go empty bucket number one, because those are the things you've already decided are discretionary. And that discretionary cannot be more important than getting money into your classroom. If you're not done in bucket one, then you start dipping into bucket two. This way also ensures that you're not cutting budgets in ways that are going to have direct impact on students. So one thing you can do also is benchmark your spending per student. So this is how spending per student has changed over the last 20 years in Kansas. So instruction has, for example, has gone from 5,259 to 9,849. It's an 87% increase. And you can see the change. Now, this is the state of Kansas. Um, if this was your district, you could say a question might be, why does our non-instruction spending exceed the 59% rate of inflation over that period, or whatever period you're looking at? And how does our spending per student compare to districts with similar size? Um, the purchasing power and so forth is going to make a difference. Whether you're in rural or urban can make a difference. But you want to look at comparable districts. So here's an example of how wide these variances are. This was from the 25 school year. And we look at different size. So the districts with 500 to 1,000 students, looking at administration, as little as $917 per student and as much as 2,801. That's an enormous difference. Look at operations, 900 to 3,700. The gaps are tend to get a little bit less disparity in the gaps as the districts grow in size, but even in the 5,000 to 10,000 category, you see some really large differences. And it's not the point of this is not to, there's no right number. It should be, but if you're way above something, certainly way above median and maybe even above minimum, you want to find out what are other districts doing that we could maybe do to bring down our costs. It's a way of starting. It's a kind of a guidepost of where are we going to start looking where we might find a lot of money. You can do the kind of the same thing with comparing your employment and enrollment history. So here we have the state of Kansas, enrollment down 1%, but employment overall up 16%. That's obviously out of balance, especially when you look at the number of managers being up 40% and other non-teaching positions up 24%. And again, you had good reason. You thought this was the right thing to do, and you probably had you had identified some needs. But if you're not meeting your student outcome goals and you need to get more money into the classroom to do so, it has to come from somewhere. So where are the things that we can look? And this is a way of identifying what we can do to cut back in those areas so that you're not impacting classrooms. So these are the questions, and same thing. Why are they growing faster, and how do we compare to other districts? So here's some other questions. And talking, this goes back to the building needs assessment. The law says school boards shall conduct. Now, I know there's been guidance given to school districts that say that all that really means is you are supposed to sign off on the reports. Well, first of all, some of those reports are really not giving much information. It's more like Festivus with the list of grievances. Like the legislature doesn't care about us, we don't get enough money, it's the parents' fault, and so forth. But if you go ask people, go ask teachers, you might hear something different. Like we have a lot of teachers who still don't know how to teach kids how to read. Board members, so you want to start a conversation about how do we go about doing this? And it doesn't mean that every board member has to go to every school. You can do this however you want. You just want to make sure that your board is getting a broad range of information from your teachers and principals to really understand the needs in each building, and they will differ. So you can ask, where can I find, we have to do this, we have to identify the budgetary changes needed. Where can I find what we did? Especially if you're a new board member. Um, I I'd be surprised if you could actually, if someone could pull up a report and says, well, this is what we did. You're more likely to get generalities. And how do you know if that actually took place? You want to really understand where that money came from because you want to make sure that you're getting it where it needs to go and not taking it from some place that could have a different kind of impact on students. Another one is, does our budget allocate money to overcome all these needs? And if not, shouldn't we reduce these non-instructional spending to get more money into the classroom? It's understanding the how the money, what the budget is trying to accomplish. If it's just allocating money similar to what you did in the prior year, the budget isn't designed to improve student outcomes, and that's why the school district exists. So you can ask for information, like to see how our spending on instruction, administration, and so forth compares with similar size. Ask your finance staff to get you some data showing that staff breakout. We get the data from the Department of Education and they get it from school districts. So they all have this information. They should easily be able to get it to you in a pretty quick period of time. So you can start asking informed questions and working together to find solutions. So, what other things could you do to maybe make better use of resources? One thing that is starting to really catch on is sharing non-instructional service coordination with other districts. Sometimes within the county, sometimes even across county lines. Depends on, what's convenient. And this can be, I know a few years ago, the Johnson County superintendents got together. One of the superintendents wanted to try to do this and say his pitch was, how about one district coordinate all the transportation, another one coordinate all the food or the some of the back office functions. And turns out he was the only one interested in doing it. But even in the larger areas, this is how private business operates. You don't need to have a payroll office at every McDonald's. You don't have to have a transportation system with every restaurant. They're coordinated. There's common ownership. There's ways they can work together. And the same thing can apply with school districts. You want to make sure that your employee contributions to benefit plans are similar to what your taxpayers are experiencing. In many cases, and again, there was probably good reason for doing it. A lot of times, government employees pay a lot less into their health care than the people who are paying taxes to keep the district open. And so it would not be an easy way. I mean, obviously there'd be pushback, but you have to balance, is it going to, it's something you can explain to your community that we're having to make some changes. It's an option to look at. It's not that you have to do it or should do it, but it's a way of trying to understand how our district is working in relationship to the people we're serving. Paid time off is another one where there tends to be a lot of difference between what the businesses in your community are offering to their employees versus what the city or the county or the school district offers. So just understanding those differences are ways of finding some more options to look at. And I'll stop here and then I'll start taking questions. But basically, make sure that you're using your community's outcome goals to gain agreement on building a student-focused budget. Tracy worked with one district they were pleased with what they were doing. They were 10 points above the state average. But when they started talking about it, they realized that like 43% wasn't mission accomplished to their community. The community expected a lot more. They went out and asked and found out that it was really more like 70 to 80%. So we know we're not going to get there by doing the same things we're doing now. What we have to know, that's where we're going. So, and that is then the focus. It's not the board member's idea. It's not the superintendent's notion. This is what the community expects from us. Where to get to whatever that number is. That's a way that you start coalescing around a goal, a very specific goal, not we're going to do better. We're going to get to 70% over this number of years, or we're going to improve 5 points between this year and next year. And that's our plan to keep going to get to where we need to go. It has to be methodical, very carefully thought out, and specific and measurable. So with that, I am going to stop sharing. And Tracy, you can have questions fire away.
I will. And Dave, for some reason we lost your camera, but I think I'm going to turn over to Ward. Ward usually has a
Oh,
couple of good questions. Do you want to
there we
start us
go.
off, Ward? There you are.
You're back. Good presentation. There's so many questions that come up with school finance, but what seems to come up, the more people I talk to, school board members, is how difficult it is for them to get to talk to teachers.
Hmm.
They just, whether it's the superintendents have some regulation, it is not against the law for superintendents to allow school board members to go in and talk to school districts or to be involved in the school improvement process. And I don't have good answers for them. Talk to the superintendent, find a way. Comment on that. How can we get
Sure.
board members talk
So
to teachers?
if it's not met with immediate, okay, that's a great idea, let's go do it, then you have to kind of go into counseling mode. So you might start with, well, what's the problem? I mean, here's why I'm asking. You want to make sure that it's like, I know of one district that found out their teachers didn't think they knew how to teach kids how to read.
Right.
That's a serious problem. Another district found out that teachers were going to Instagram to get their lesson plans. That's a serious problem. We need to hear that, and sometimes I think we can all relate to this. If you complain long enough and nothing happens, you stop complaining. But maybe when someone new comes in, like a school board member, the people are more inclined to say, well, let's take a shot. Maybe this time someone will listen. You have to go ask. and you want to, it's trying to make sure that make your case of what's wrong, what could go wrong with us hearing this directly. Now, it's understandable that you might have some management at the district feel like you're trying to go around them, and you have to make sure that they understand that's not the case. You need to really hear it so you can internalize the issue. It's hard to really grasp the seriousness of a problem if you're just reading about it. It's a big difference when you're in there, and it also builds a better connection with your staff if you're in there talking about, tell me what the real problems are here. So and don't worry about, so you'll get, we've heard this. Well, so and so says we don't have to do it. Okay, I'm not saying we have to do it. I'm saying we want to do it. Why shouldn't we? What's the worst thing that could happen from us hearing directly from teachers and principals?
I will say that in one of our webinars, we had a Derby superintendent said that she sets up a coffee. There's a name for it, and I apologize, I don't recall what it is. So that board members go in and they have lunch or they have coffee with teachers, and they just sit in and talk to teachers and just ask questions and just listen to some of the issues that the teachers may have. And they do that on a regular basis. And they feel like that has really developed this trust and feeling like everybody in the district is moving in the same direction and is focused on the same issues. And the teachers feel heard. It's a very, morale boosting exercise as well.
That'd be good answers. I think communication seems to be the major key, and they should never be fearful of talking to teachers. As it's just like the example you gave. I mean, if every board member would go in or a board member or superintendent and ask K through 3 teachers, why aren't we doing as well as we should be doing in reading? Do you have any reason? You'd be amazed at the answers and the positive things that could come out of that. So I wish they'd do it.
Yeah, and you want to approach it from make sure that this isn't like any kind of finger pointing exercise. You're not trying to assess blame. It's when at the beginning of every meeting and probably once or twice during the meeting, you want to really emphasize that we understand that everybody's been working very hard. And this isn't about anybody doing anything wrong. We need to figure out what we have to do differently, and we need your input so that we know as a board that we're putting money where it's going to do the most good. So we want to have this conversation. We need this attitude that no one's to blame, but everyone's responsible for figuring out what we have to do and then faithfully implementing that plan.
Bingo. Okay, thanks, Dave.
Well, would you have something else, Ward?
Not for
I have
right
a
now.
couple of other questions.
I've
Okay.
got a couple.
Well,
Let somebody else.
Well, you may have something that you want to jump in on, so please do if something comes up. One of the things that I think that everyone is dealing with, and I know that all of us on this call, are aware of the declining enrollment, and the forecast for that declining enrollment does not look good. It's not positive. There's forecasted that there will be continued decline in enrollment in Kansas, and so we know that school districts, as we have this conversation, will be dealing with even perhaps tighter budgets. I mean, there's always going to be not enough money to go around, but as we see declining enrollment, that can even be more difficult. So as you think about one of the things you talked about, Dave, in your presentation, or some of the practical steps, which I think are very helpful. You talked about the budget. You talked about really having these pointed targets and looking at things very specifically in order to think about, is this a need or this a want? And I know that those are hard conversations. So when you think about those needs and wants, those buckets and forecasting, is there any way that school board members or superintendents would be able to think about that forecasting? We talked about the immediate budget, but is there some way of being able to bring that forecasting into the conversation?
Well, ideally, in the years gone by, rather the tendency, and this is human nature, this isn't something unique to schools. If you have money, the tendency is to spend it. and assume that it's always going to keep coming in. But you have to be prepared for something. You don't know what, but something is going to happen at some point. So you want to make sure you're not spending money in a way that puts you in the kind of a position you're in right now. Like I know some districts use COVID money for ongoing operating expense. Well, now what do? You should never use one-time money for anything other than one-time costs so that you're not trapped into that. Uh, Understanding, I don't think we can emphasize this enough. Building everything around achieving a very specific goal helps get through some of the tough conversations you might have to have or are having right now. This is why we're doing it. We have to get more money into our classroom. And I think most people would agree, maybe a little grudgingly, but they would agree that that's a higher priority than the other thing that you're going to change. And you want to keep the focus on this is the reason. It's not picking on anyone. It's not saying anyone did anything wrong. Um, but it's really if you stay on target of achieving a goal and bringing everybody around accomplishing that goal, it actually brings staff closer together. It brings the community. The community builds more trust with the district. And it's just understanding what you're trying to accomplish and make sure you're not letting anything get in the way of that.
I think it's valuable as you were talking about setting up those goals. We've had previous webinars who've talked about ensuring that the entire board has determined what are our values, what is it that we see ourselves as needing to accomplish as our highest priorities, and then everything flowing from that, which is what I'm hearing echoed in the conversation today, which can sometimes I saw that you pointed out some what we might call low-hanging fruit that can
Mhm.
easily be identified, and even though they may be things that we like, they may be things that we can more easily get rid of. But as we think about moving forward, these conversations are going to continue to happen and will need to happen. And so having that kind of North Star and that point of these are our goals, these are our values, and these are what we agree on, these are the things that we are going to hold dear and move forward in that way that everything will flow from that. How does that transfer into, we have those conversations, but how does that transfer into the ongoing conversations with a board? I mean, everybody sets up their budget at one point, but that budget is going to continue to be a part of the conversation throughout the school year.
Mhm. Sure. So um, no matter how hard you try, you're probably not going to be able to meet all of the needs you identify in each school. And so throughout the year, when there is a proposal to, I'd like to do this, could we buy that? The first question you'd want to ask is, have we met all the needs in our classrooms? If not, I don't understand why we should be considering spending money outside the classroom. If we have extra money to spend, shouldn't it be spent overcoming these needs that are holding kids back? It's constantly using your goal and what you need to accomplish your goal as the driving every decision in your district. It has to be focused on that, and train people to do that. It's like this might be a worthwhile. Unfortunately, if we haven't met all of our goals, I'm sure you could understand that that's a higher priority, and we need to stay focused on what we're trying to accomplish. Maybe someday we could entertain this proposal. It's 80% probably of the typical district's expenses are personnel. And so you are going to have to really know how your district is staffed, how that has changed over time. You know, the benchmarking exercise I showed you is really condensed. But when you look at the report that your district is sending in, to the Department of Education, look at that, how that's changed for a number of years, and you'll probably come up with some really good ideas of how you could do something different. I'll give you a simple example. We did a story on the Sentinel this week about Olathe letting go 6 mental health workers and how they were concerned about that. And uh, we looked at their employee listing. They have 136 employees in other. I mean, there's probably 3 dozen employment categories on these reports. They had 136 people who didn't fit into any of those. What are they? They had, I think it was 68 people focus on keeping attendance records. And districts, other big districts in Johnson County had half that or less. So you can't assume that what we've been doing is what we need to be doing going forward. Constantly looking at how we're spending money. Do we really need to do this? Making sure you don't put yourself in a position where you're going to fall behind. You're going to have to look at personnel. And so you want to make the decisions. How are we? And it's tougher in a small district. You probably don't have 136 people sitting around in an other category, um, but it's everywhere. You have regional service centers who provide payroll services. Um, you can outsource some of these things if it's, and of course I understand you don't want to lose, you don't want people losing their jobs. And if you come to that, everybody has to understand that those people didn't do anything wrong. You have to you explain why you have to make the decision and how you arrived at it. Um, but you keep the focus on what you're trying to accomplish and just continue repeating that over and over and over.
We had, and those are very hard decisions. All of these are hard decisions, and recognizing that they are hard decisions because they're placing one thing over another. Now, this last week I had a conversation with a board member who was very frustrated because the board member said, I'm spending all of my time talking about things that are not related to the classroom, new HVAC systems or facilities issues, and that's taking up a lot of our time and it's taking up our attention, taking up our budget. Is there any kind of advice that you might have for that board member? The board member said, this is not what I got. This is not what I ran on. This is not what I expected that I would do when I sat on the board, but it seems to be taking up the majority of our time.
Well, that's another reason to consider outsourcing as much of that as possible. If you have 6 districts in your county, how can you share that responsibility and coordinate? And so that the more that you can offload to whether it's a regional service center or share with another district, the more time you're going to have to focus on your mission. And it's hard when things have been neglected, let's say, and we're probably all guilty of that to some degree. Um, but you have to put a plan together. Uh, you might focus a work session on some of these. Let's get all the flug out of the way. Let's talk about the maintenance issues. Let's put a plan in place one time, and then we're going to follow it. And maybe it's one board member or 2 board members' responsibility to really stay on top of that and make sure that things are happening the way they should. So you have to deal with that, but you want to get to a point where you're spending at least half your time in a board meeting
Mhm.
talking about improving outcomes. You want to have a schedule of, if you have 9 schools in your district, you want the principal from each school maybe coming in, one principal a month at a board meeting and really talking about these are the things we identified in our needs assessment. These are the changes we made. This is the progress we're making. Maybe it's better than we thought. Maybe it's not quite as good as we thought, but we talk about it. And if it's not getting exactly what you hoped, what are you going to do differently? And those kinds of discussions can be informative for the principals in other schools. It's
Well,
also very subtly reminding your community that this is your focus. You're not there talking about balls and buses, as one superintendent we know talked about. It's focusing on students.
Well, I agree. And I think that having those, what you talked about, having those questions, how does this affect the classroom, really brings that into the conversation consistently. Well, Ward, do you have other questions? Those are all the questions that we have, and I don't want to take up everyone's time more than is necessary. But did you have anything else you would like to contribute or ask Ward?
I just have one comment. Talked to a school board member last week, and what they requested, and it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, is that they are requesting that after the consent calendar, that there's going to be a report on what they're doing on their reading in their K through 3. That's a very simple thing. But if they do that for every board meeting for the rest of the year, I have a feeling that they're going to improve their K through 3 reading because they're discussing it at a board member, at a meeting. And you're going to see results when you discuss it, talk about it, and find ways to improve it. So uh, I wish every school district would do that.
Yeah.
Good enough.
Well,
I'm
I
good.
think that it also brings to mind and helps teachers see that the school board is really talking about what's happening in the classroom. They care about that and how to support teachers in the
But they do
classroom,
have the
which is
right
something you
to
talked
ask
about.
something to
Yeah.
be on the agenda.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Dave, for the conversation today. Really appreciate all the practical questions, the practical tips that you provided. They're easy to implement, but we also know that these are hard questions and hard decisions that superintendents and school boards are making right now when they're dealing with a budget and considering what they're going to be able to do and not be able to do, their needs versus their wants next academic year. I want to let everybody know that we have more webinars coming up. We will be sending out information later today on the cell phone ban webinar that will be held on Tuesday, May 5th at noon. Senator Blasey and SBAE Kansas legal hotline attorney Fritz Edmonds will discuss the ban and guidance on the policy, and we will also release KSBRC model policy and guidance with that information. Also, on Wednesday, May 27th at noon, Aaron Salt will join us again for a webinar on effective governance and superintendent evaluation process. And we have more webinars coming up. We'll have one in June on the Mississippi Miracle. I know that that is on top of mind for a lot of people. How did they do it? It's much more complicated than you might think as a miracle. So if you have topics that you would like for us to present in a webinar and bring together some experts, we would love to hear about that. Please let us know. And we hope that everyone has a great rest of their day. Thanks once again, Dave and Ward. And we hope everyone continues to do all the great work that we do. If you're a school board member or superintendent, we appreciate your service and wish you all the best.